Welcome back to Celebrity Radio. It's Alex Belfield talking to some of the world's biggest stars and some of my favourite people, and we've got one for you today. Kiki Dee, how are you?
Hi, Alex. I'm really well, thank you.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you. And the first thing we must talk about is your name, because you're not Kiki Dee, are you? This is the work of a man called Mitch Murray, who is the father of two of my best friends, Gina and Mass. Who knew? It's a small world, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, no, back in the 60s when I got a record deal very young with Fontana Records, he was brought in to write some songs for me, and he came up with the name Kiki Dee.
Yes.
And I said to my dad at the time, you know, I'm good Yorkshire dad, good Yorkshire lass. Don't think I'll be singing in 5 years if they call me Kinky. So, you know, they came up with Kiki, and I kind of went for it.
Do you think Pauline Matthews would have been as successful?
Probably not. I mean, it sounds kind of normal, doesn't it? I think Pauline in France sounds a lot sexier. Pauline.
Yeah. Yes, it does. You're quite. But everything sounds sexier in France, doesn't it? Let's face it.
Well, that is
true. What an incredible life and career you've had. And I've been Googling you and listening to these clips, especially those from back in the early days. And what a voice you've got. It's a beautiful instrument, that.
Well, you know, I'm doing my best to keep it going. You know, I've actually got a new vocal coach, who's a lovely lady who's teaching me some quite funny, amusing things to do, but they're great for hotels because they're not too loud.
Right.
But they kind of connect your larynx with your breathing, with your, you know, having your, looking at the athletic side of keeping a voice going, you know, after all these years. It's quite important, really.
And those old jokes about how do you warm up? Well, I use a bottle of Evian and a cigarette. That's not really true, is it? It is something like a muscle in a gym that you have to work at to keep as strong as it is.
For me, yeah. I mean, I've always had a slightly husky voice anyway, so the cigarette would probably take it in the wrong direction, you know. So, yeah, I'm doing okay, and I take everything now, like you do as you get older. I take it all as it comes, and you know, try and keep my feet on the ground, and try and enjoy it as much as possible, you know. That's the main thing.
I'm always amazed how hard it is to get started, but when we look at the beginning of your career, it was extraordinary, going from Bradford to Motown. Talk to me about how you got your first break, because being found is the biggest problem. You can have the greatest gift in the world, but if no one cares, it almost doesn't matter, does it?
No, well, I mean, I left school at 15 in Yorkshire. And I got a job at Boots Chemist, which is a big, you know, for anybody who's not from the UK, it's a big chemist chain, pharmacy chain in the UK. I worked there for 12 weeks, but while I was there, I was singing in Leeds, a place near Bradford, Yorkshire, 3 nights a week with a dance band. And someone came in, a sales rep from Fontana Records, and I went down to London with my dad at 16. It's like kind of like a movie, really, and did the audition and got the part, you know, got the record deal, and so I was there for 5 years, and then I did a stint at Motown, did some recording for them. Same thing, someone heard me, and I've got this gold set out at the moment, and that's the first album on those 2 albums, you know, the Fontana years and the Motown years.
And what an incredible time. I mean, we're looking at 1963-64. Was there a better period in show business or for music? It seems to me like it was thrilling. It was an exciting time, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing Love Me Do on the radio by the Beatles and thinking, what's that? That sounds different. And I saw the Stones in Battersea Park in London right at the beginning, when, you know, and then there was, of course, British film was happening, and pop art, you know. So London was just the most extraordinary city to be in. I mean, it is a great city, but in the early 60s onward, it was quite the place to be, you know. It was amazing for a young girl of 16 to arrive there, you know. So I did have some quite interesting experiences as an ingenue, you know, turning up, and I'd never drunk wine till I went to London, because, you know, you didn't drink wine with a meal in the north of England. I don't think you did in the UK in the early 60s, really.
No.
And so I'd go out to dinner and have wine, and I'd feel so sophisticated, you know. It was brilliant, really, brilliant.
Like you, I'm from the north, not quite as north as you. I'm from Nottingham, and going to London is still magical. I wonder what Soho was like at that point, because, again, the level of star, and we're going to get on to Dusty in a moment, you did backing vocals for her. I mean, one legend after the next, whether it was Monkhouse hosting the Talk of the Town and this sort of thing. I mean, incredible people doing incredible things nightly. I mean, what a thrill to be around this type of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird. I was talking about Bob Monkhouse to Adrian Just today, who used to be on Radio 1.
Yes.
Who's been doing a little bit of PR for me, and we were talking about how clever he was, Bob Monkhouse. And Dusty, of course, my God, you know, what a great talent.
Let's pause there a minute. Was Dusty the greatest female vocalist ever in Britain? It seems to me we could probably have a good row about this one.
Well, I think I would say that Dusty was one of the greatest pop singers to come out of the UK. Most definitely.
Just prolific, right? I mean, you listen to those, especially, again, the early stuff. What a voice, and the timbre and the sense of rhythm. And again, I suppose you associate with her, and that's why Motown came knocking, because it's that same sense of soul, isn't it?
Well, I think all the singers then that were around, the ones I was aware of, all had their own sound. I mean, you know, you could hear the first line of a song if it was Dusty, or Mick Jagger, or Lulu, or Sandy Shaw, and you knew who it was straight away. And I think that was the magic of that time, is that there were a lot of individual voices around. Yeah. There's a lot of great singers now, but you don't always find that quality of uniqueness. I find that's personally my old ears, you know, that's the way I hear it.
I agree, and also they all seem to sound pretty similar. They've got that same sort of affectation at the moment, which is bizarre. We were talking earlier last night.
Don't get me wrong, there's some fantastic singers out there, but there's so many people doing music now that because it's possible to, which is great. But, you know, you do tend to get a bit of a kind of factory turnout. You know, everything's perfect.
Yeah.
And everything's tuned and everything's beautifully done. And somehow there's something about those 60s recordings, even the rough ones, that just has that. Even the Motown singles from the early 60s are quite rough, actually.
Yeah.
But they just have that rhythm and that soul, you know.
The thing all these songs have in common is melody. Even last night I was telling you about Barry Manilow, who was saying the trouble today is they don't write melodies. The reason these songs that I'm still singing today are hits are because of the melodies.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that there's so many. Actually, it would be an interesting documentary to make of how many of the songs that we all know from that period have French or Italian melodies. Because a lot of songs were adapted from those languages and with English lyrics, and that would be interesting. But yeah, Europe was providing some pretty amazing pop melodies at that time, yeah.
As we move into the 70s, we look at your life and your career, and again, without getting grubby, I noticed one of the things you did was the Benny Hill show, and I wonder what it was like for a young girl back then. Were you ever part of that grubbiness? Just the other week I was interviewing somebody who said that the casting couch did exist, absolutely, and you had to be on your toes. Were you aware of this then, or was it an innocent time that you weren't part of? You were just a girl from the north popping into London and back home.
Well, for me, I mean, I was quite a young sort of 20-year-old, you know, and I also had a lot of people around me, and I was quite a lass, really. But the only thing I can remember of that kind of sexism, if you like to call it that, is if you did a photo session and with a newspaper, you know, tabloid, and they'd ask you to lift your skirt up a bit, you know, so we can see your knees and all that. You know, it was all a little bit weird, you know. That's the only thing I can really remember. But I certainly wasn't mature enough or sort of sexy enough in that sense to have got caught up in all that, thank God, you know. I just used to turn up and sing live. I mean, the Benny Hill show, he was actually a nice bloke, and I sang live on his show, and I did Morecambe and Wise as well. All these clips are online, you know, it's quite amazing.
Yeah. Living on forever.
I sang the very best I could, because I always had to work hard, and always do have to work hard to sing well. And I kept that my focus and my winning formula, if you like. You know, so I didn't need to. It never entered my life, if I'm honest. That whole kind of thing. I can see how it did happen to a lot of people, definitely.
I wonder whether, again, it's having that sort of northern family unit and all of that stuff. Did you always remember where you came from, and the fact that, Yorkshire born, Yorkshire bred and all of that is completely unique in the UK? It still has community, doesn't it?
I think that if you come from a good, solid background of people who don't let you forget who you are,
yeah,
in a good way,
yeah.
You'll always be all right. I mean, I was fortunate that I had a very functional, as you say, we didn't have a lot materially when I was growing up, but we certainly had everything else that you need to become a sane person to deal with all the horrible things in the world, So I feel, looking back, it was always easy when you're older and you can look back and see it objectively, but I did have that solid, as you say, that real kind of grounded upbringing. Yeah, so I was very lucky.
When you do a show like Morecambe and Wise, is it shocking how famous you are the next day? Because today you do a TV show, there might be 500,000 people, 1 million people watching. They'll be watching it on the internet over the next 6 months. Back then there were 2 channels, and you either watched that or the other thing, and you became a megastar overnight. Was it astounding how quickly you became famous?
Well, the thing is, I didn't really become that famous, ironically, until I got a hit record with Elton John's label, in the 70s. I mean, people knew who I was. I'd done, the Motown thing, the Motown recordings, and I'd done Fontana Records, and I'd done these tellies. And after the TVs, you would get a lot more people seeing you in the supermarket and thinking, she looks familiar, But I've always had a kind of normal, luckily enough, touch wood, a normal time with it, And, never got carried away, just kept going and kept my feet on the ground. And, so I didn't really suffer from the paparazzi and all that kind of, overkill. I used to sometimes, when I was out with Elton, when we had the big records on his label, I used to kind of almost put my head into his shoulders, because he just always seemed so confident, and I was a little bit insecure, well, a lot insecure at that time. And there'd be all these flashing cameras coming at you, and I'd just kind of lean into him. And I did find some of that a bit overwhelming, but apart from that, I've done okay,
Done okay, you've done remarkably well. Let's talk about the Elton, but seriously, let's talk about the Elton years. I mean, here we are in 2019, and he's still touring the world, doing arena after arena. I'm sat in Las Vegas, where he headlines at the Coliseum. Back then, was he just a normal guy that offered you a record contract, or was he a megastar that you're in awe of? How did you perceive him?
Well, he had been famous for a couple of years, because I signed in 73. And he'd had that big success in LA. I believe he played a big gig there, and it sort of all took off. Had a couple of albums out, and he always had huge star quality. He was always a kind of diva in a good way, And I found him. He was born 2 weeks after me, so I never let him forget that. I'm older than you, so watch it. But we always just hit it off. From the off, really. There's a great... Do you want to hear a funny story?
I would love to.
The first night I met him, I was invited to his London flat, and his mum was coming over, and Neil Young was coming round, believe it or not. And I was a little bit in awe, to meet him and everything. And I went into the flat, and his mum was lovely, and I met Neil Young, which was great. And someone said, I can't remember now, but... Kiki, would you go into the kitchen? Let's have some champagne to celebrate Rocket Records, So I went into the kitchen and to get the champagne glasses, and they were in a glass cupboard that you had to slide across, very 60s style, frosted glass cupboard. And it was actually open, so I put my hand across and dropped all the champagne glasses on the floor.
Oh, no.
Elton's first rock star kind of champagne glasses, And he walked in and looked at me, and I looked at him, and he burst out laughing, and that was the beginning of the friendship, really.
Thank God he'd got 32 other houses with 32 other sets of champagne glasses. Wow.
But that was the beginning of and I was, absolutely mortified, as you can imagine.
Of course.
He was so generous and funny, though it was hysterical, because he's always had a great sense of humour, really.
When you speak to him today or see him today, is it just Elton, your friend, or are you still sort of in awe and, my God, that's Elton John? Because you never get over it. It never becomes normal, does it, at that stage?
I think, there's kind of two sides to it. If I see him privately, if I bump into him publicly, there's always a little bit of, it's Elton John, the megastar, and I'm Kiki, who used to work with him,
Yeah.
And I've always had respect for him, and I've never been intrusive because his life is so extraordinary. I don't expect, do you know what I mean? I don't sort of ring up and say, can you do this, can you do that? And yet when I get
Could you buy me some champagne glasses, that sort of thing?
That would be a good present, actually. If I see him privately, after a drink, or I know he doesn't drink, but, in a relaxed environment, we just go back to the people we were when we met, and because that's who we still are, do you know what I mean? And I think you can't get away, if you've known people before you were really famous, it's very rare that you can actually get away with pulling one over on them, So I don't think he'd do a diva on me, because he knows me from way back and, in a real way. That makes sense.
And then, of course, we look at that song, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, still getting huge airplay today.
The Dongo song, Dongo. Dongo Breaking My Heart.
And, of course, a karaoke favourite, never going to get old, the work of Bernie and Elton. Your affection for that must be incredible because it's a global hit that people still want to play today. That's not necessarily a given, is it?
Well, it's not. And I mean, there were times in the sort of 80s when I used to think, oh, Lord, am I ever going to escape this song, But actually, then I started to get wise and I thought, no, this is a vehicle for me. And now, I mean, many, many years later, I do a in my acoustic show, which I tour the UK and a bit of Europe, I do a slowed down version of Don't Go Breaking My Heart, very different to the original. Yeah. I mean, I've got the balls, if you like, to actually do that because I couldn't keep doing. I don't think I could go out there and tour and do a show reproducing what I did vocally, 45, 50 years ago.
Right.
So I have to move on. And I do all those songs in my acoustic show, but I do Amoureuses and I've got music in me, but, they're just done acoustically and I put lots of other things in as well. So really, the song's been brilliant to me, so I embrace it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what a great song it is.
It's a very good pop record, actually, and the strings were arranged by a guy called James Newton Howard. The strings on it are brilliant, and he was in Elton's band at the time, and he went on. If you look at like every third Hollywood film, James Newton Howard has done the music for. He's just a huge Hollywood writer now, but he's a great arranger.
In our careers, we normally have different sections and it becomes this part of our career and that part. And one of the best parts of your career has been musical theatre, and you were defined by Willie Russell's Blood Brothers, which to me is still probably the greatest play musical ever, because it is a play, let's face it. And there you were playing Mrs. Johnson, and what a fantastic opportunity to shine, because if you don't pull off Tell Me It's Not True, you ain't going to get there, are you? I mean, it's one of those you can either do or not do, and you did it so great, and it was so well acclaimed. You must be thrilled.
Yeah, I had 3 weeks to learn it. I auditioned with Bill Kenwright in 1987. It came along at the right time. I'd been the pop star, I'd done Live Aid with Elton in 85, and I needed something workaday. I needed something where you were as good as your last show.
Yeah.
And I'm a good team player, actually. I loved working with all the actors, that I worked with. There's a sort of irony about that show because Elton's guitarist, Davy Johnston, I dated for about 4 or 5 years in the 70s. We're still great mates. And he was a friend of Willie Russell, who wrote Blood Brothers. And the character I played, all those years later, was Mrs. Johnston. So it's really quite odd. But what a great role. I mean, Carole King played it. Lots of UK actresses played it. Amazing,
And utterly traumatic and devastating. How did you get through that last 5 minutes?
Before I knew it backwards.
Really?
And when I went to see it, I knew everybody's lines, so I couldn't emotionally connect with it. because I'd done it. I performed it for 2 years, you know, and I just couldn't. But I could kind of see what people were getting out of it. But I'd love to have seen it before I performed it, but it wasn't. Of course, it wasn't running at that time, so I never got to see it, you know.
How did you get through it nightly? Because, I mean, it's utterly devastating. And again, it's that tipping point, isn't it? Where you've got to be devastated as a mother who's had the worst tragedy ever, but at the same time, get through the song and then take your bows at the end.
Well, you know what? It's a funny thing, but, well, I lived in London and I used to sleep in my own place, so I could go home every night, which no touring. That was good. We did tour it a long time, but when we got to London, it got better. And the other thing that I did learn, because I'm not a film actress, so I couldn't do a film. I could probably do a play, because I'd have a chance to learn it and learn how to act, and which is what I did with Blood Brothers. But there's something about trusting the script and trusting the character without having to do too many histrionics. I found, this is something I discovered from doing it, I did about 1,000 shows over a 4 or 5 year period, and I found that when I did a matinee performance and I was saving myself for the evening, so because 2 shows on a Thursday, 2 shows on a Saturday, I found that by not overdoing it, I got an amazing response from the audience.
Interesting.
And I learned that you don't have to, you can trust the script to do the work sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
And it gets you through all that emotion that, that you would have to actually feel so deeply that you couldn't do 8 shows a week, you know. So I kind of skipped it and let the script do the work. It's something I learned as my way of getting through 8 shows a week, you know.
And then we look at 93 when you did Almost Naked. I watched an interview last night that you did probably in Australia, somewhere like that. And the global reach is also fascinating. That was another sort of seminal point in your career where it gave you another burst of life, didn't it? Why did you choose to do that? And by the way, congratulations, you are delicious. There's no question about this.
Bless you. Well, the thing is, to be honest with you, this is the point where I thought, you know what? I kind of need to become a singer and I need to become a writer again, because Elton was the one who got me into writing. I want to not have to have the pressure of trying to be a big star. I want to be able to have the freedom to be experimental. And I hooked up with a guy called Steve Brown, who was one of the people who discovered Elton. He was the one who, worked at Dick James Music in the early days and got Elton writing less Eurovision songs, and he found your song, and he said, that's the way you should be going, as a writer. And he is such an amazing person in the industry. He said, go away, do an acoustic tour, and we ended up, and we did, me and a guy called Carmelo Lugeri, and we've been working together for 25 years. And he also executively produced an album we did in 1998 called Where Rivers Meet, which is completely uncommercial. It's got East-West influences, tablas, Indian singer, Indian strings. And we just kind of do what we want, and we go out and we do a very eclectic show, and that's what I do now, including all the old hits and everything. I just do that.
What an incredible life and career that continues to go from strength to strength. 40 singles, 12 albums, and this new one, Gold, a triple CD, which is remarkable value, by the way, available through Amazon and people like that who really have...
Apparently it's going to be in the supermarkets. I've never been in a British supermarket before, I don't think, as a CD, so I shall have to be careful if I go into Sainsbury's,
The thrill of being next to the organic vegetables in Asda. These are things that we must remember in our career. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Kiki Dee is, one of our greatest legends and stars. What a life and career. And you can get the new triple album Gold. Yeah, it has, and it continues. Good luck with everything. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.